Namaste, my love. So I am filming my first Shakti Temple talk back in the USA, back in California. And the way I do these talks is just whatever is really moving in the field for me, whatever I'm observing in the hologram without and inside myself, and having insights and revelations about. And within my line of work, one of the pieces that I work with the most prominently is the reconciling of opposites, the reconciling and healing of the rift between the masculine and feminine, which we are seeing so much distortion between at this time. Like, these polarities are really stretching right now. We can see this in the imbalance in the elementals of the fire element, the water element on the planet. We see this in our relationships, not only with other but also with the self. And so today what that brings me to is one of the things that I refer to as the root wound, one of the root causes of this schism between the masculine and feminine forces. And that root wound, or what I am referring in this video to as the greatest wound on the planet, is shame. And specifically shame placed on our most natural, most powerful, most essential force, that is our sex and sexuality. Now, sex, if we think of it as an energy, this is the reason we are even manifest here, right? And for us to manifest, there is the necessity of the masculine and the feminine coming together to create that sacred third, to create that spark of life that is divinity, that then manifests in a myriad of forms. And so this energy of our sexuality is that magnetic force. It's that potent creative force that not only will create life, will not only manifest life, but it's also the force that draws those two poles together for that act of creation to take place. And so when we come into connecting into the root wound of shame, this is the greatest wound that is surrounding and enveloping our sexuality. And I want to talk about the relationship to shame in both a positive and a negative light, because shame is not just something to be ashamed of that just amplifies. It is something that we all are navigating, and it's something that can actually be a great ally and teacher on our path. So I want to talk about the positive aspects of shame as well as the negative, and I'm going to start out with the negative. So the negative aspect of shame is whenever the energy of shame is placed onto something that is natural, that is elemental, that is essential to the very core of our being, such as just simply our sexuality. Every single human being that comes in to this earth plane comes in through sexuality and comes in with sexuality, right? Even children start to explore this force in different ways, and frequently this is where the first inklings of shame from outside are placed onto us. This idea that it is actually shameful to have a penis or a vagina, that is actually shameful to show them, to touch them, to take pleasure in them even, or to be curious about the other, right? To be curious about someone else's penis or vagina. And so we end up with this great stigma because we have this great force moving within us. And then especially as adolescents and preteens, this force becomes magnanimous, and we are not initiated in how to properly use this force, how to properly relate to this force, how to properly channel this force. And this, I believe, is the root of our war against our environment, against nature, the war between the sexes, and the suppression of and control of women, of the feminine, and the destruction and distortion of the masculine. And we need to develop and reclaim our birthright of right relationship with our sexuality. When we have right relationship, meaning we're not severed from this force at a young age through the act of external shame being placed on us through parental figures, through society, through religion. When this happen. So most of us are dealing with this at this point, right? Most of us. And so it's almost like a retroactive effect where we have to go back and heal that core wound and then proactively not pass that on to our children, right? To not shame, to not create that same schism. This was a great design to control humanity. Let's create a distortion, a confusion, this idea of sin around the most elemental force that exists within us, around something that we will all be pulled by magnanimously throughout our lives. Whoa! All of a sudden, we are cut off from the root. We are cut off from our power. We no longer have a right to be here even, because just us being here is the result of indulgence in this act of sin, right? So you create this shame, and it acts as a dam on one of the most powerful forces moving through us. And naturally, if you dam a river, it doesn't mean the water stops coming, right? It then just diverts into other areas, right? If a fire is no longer contained, it spreads and wreaks more havoc. So the result of this shame that we're seeing, I believe, is resulting in war, is resulting in environmental destruction, resulting in sex trafficking, is resulting in almost all of the negative aspects of humanity, is this force trying to get out, to get through, to move, because it has to. The nature of life is that it has to move. The nature of sexual energy is that it has to move. But it has to move in a good way, and it can't if we are suppressing and denying or accessing and indulging. Yeah, it's all about coming into this right relationship of allowing it just simply to be natural. It's so simple and yet so difficult because we are literally millennia deep into shame, 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 shame. And we've internalized this shame, men and women alike. And it's greatly affecting our ability to love ourselves, and therefore to love and respect one another, and to love and respect our environment and the animals and the plants, and to have a direct connection to the divine, to the sacredness within all things. This is the root wound, is shame, but it's shame that's imposed from the outside. If you look at a young child, first kind of in these explorations, there is no shame. We are not born with this concept of shame around our sexuality because there is nothing to be shamed about. This is our vibrancy. This is our vitality. This is our thirst for life. This is our passion. This is our ability to connect, and that drawing force to want to commune, to want to love, to want to embrace, to want to share. It's a beautiful, beautiful force. And we're seeing at large on the planet what happens when that force is dammed by shame. It's happening in how we are treating one another, the lack of respect between the sexes, the lack of understanding between the sexes, the abundance and intensity of resentment that is building up, I believe, is largely around this confusion based on the dam of shame that is around our sexuality. If young boys are initiated into this great and powerful force moving within them and how to channel it properly, and that it's absolutely okay and that it's absolutely part of their power and their nature, but to use it wisely, imagine the protectors that we would have of the sacred. Imagine the quality of men we would have on this planet. And also with the women, imagine she's taught how sacred from a very young age this force is, and not to use it manipulatively or unconsciously, or to let it be taken from her, that it is hers and that she has the right to say yes or no to who and how this force is used and shared. Imagine the potency of the women that would be on this planet, the power of the women that would be on this planet. Just imagine. And so that is the negative aspect of shame, is this externally imprinted shame that we've then internalized as our very existence exists in shame. Right? This most powerful force that moves through us exists enveloped and imbued with shame. So let's look at moving forward now, how shame can actually be an ally and a teacher, because it absolutely can. Nothing that exists does not have the potential to be an ally and a teacher. Everything, especially these emotions, are here to teach us and to guide us into greater and greater integrity, greater and greater impeccability, greater and greater connection and communion with self, other, and the divine, that sacred trinity. So, shame as teacher and ally. When we do or act out of alignment with the whole, out of alignment with ourselves, our hearts, our bodies, our minds, our spirit, our emotions, when we act out of alignment, sometimes one of the greatest teachers that will come in is shame, and especially within our sexuality. If we start acting, and here's where it can become a vicious cycle, because that negative aspect of shame can then have us acting in shameful ways. And then we feel shame about that, but instead of being like, oh, this is actually showing me where I'm out of alignment and where I need to come back into alignment, we just internalize more shame. And so when we start to experience shame after that initial root wounding, like let's say, I'm going to use an example from my life. When I was younger, I had poor boundaries. And, I would end up in intimate experiences that maybe I was okay and I felt good going up to this certain point, but not further. And I would let it go further because I didn't have the strength, the discernment, the courage to draw my boundary. And sometimes even I would draw my boundary and it wouldn't be honored. And I wasn't strong enough to be really that strong, like, no, this is where, it's here or nothing. And so I ended up sleeping with a number of people that didn't feel good that I shared my energy with this particular person or in this particular way with this person. And what I would feel afterwards was shame, was this deep shame. And rather the way that we want to start having a relationship with that is like, not, oh God, I can't believe I did that, internalize that shame, add it to the huge pile that already exists and feel horrible about the self. That's not going to be helpful and that's the way largely we've been taught to deal with shame. Stuff it down, like whatever, and then where does it go? It just rots and festers and adds to the mountain of shame that's already there. But if we can say, hello shame, oh yeah, that wasn't in my highest. That is not a good outlet or way for me to be stewarding this very potent force that lives within me. That didn't feel good. Okay, I'm gonna learn. Thank you, teacher of shame, for showing me that, for teaching me that, for making me feel that inside my body, inside my heart, inside my mind, inside my spirit, so that I know where my boundaries are, where my discernment is, how to have a right relationship with my sexual energy, and how to let this force flow in a good and beautiful way that doesn't cause harm to myself or to other. Because then there's also an element of shame in when we don't do right to another, when we don't honor or respect the body, heart, mind, spirit of another. And I'll share another anecdote of mine when I was younger, because many of us, we aren't initiated into how to use our voices, how to communicate around these things, how to navigate love and relationships and sexuality in a good way. And I remember in my younger years having lots of, this force was rampant, was running wild in my system. And I had a lover at the time, and he was so sweet, and we had just a really beautiful relationship. But I was very fiery and had multiple attractions, and there was this other man that I was having an energy with. He was a good friend of mine, but I started having this energy with him. And I had a gathering at my home, and we were a very cuddly bunch and very explorative. And both of these men, the one I was very clearly seeing, and the one that I wasn't, but that I was interested in, and they didn't know each other, they didn't know about each other. And throughout the time together, eventually I ended up just not feeling excited about the man I was with and feeling very excited about this man. And I ended up just ignoring him and focusing my attention here, even so far as, being affectionate, physically affectionate towards that man, to the point that the man I'd been seeing and who'd been so sweet to me left without even saying goodbye, was totally hurt, and I just proceeded with this other man. And at the time, I even remember to this day this energy inside me that was awakened, and it was a very what would be the word? It didn't, not only did it not care, but it almost had this I get what I want. I don't, this is what feels good. But it was tainted. It was a tainted energy. It was a very snaky, not in a good way kind of energy. And it kind of took me over. After the fact, I felt a lot of shame. And I felt a lot of, wow, that was really incredibly insensitive of me. And I vowed in that moment never to treat another person that way. I wrote a whole letter apologizing to that other person. And since that time, I have never done anything on that level again. And not that I haven't had little moments, we're all learning. And that's where it's we have to hold those moments of shame with compassion, with a wide embrace, because we will make mistakes. We have not been taught how to properly navigate this energy. We have not been initiated properly into sex and sexuality. And so our past may be riddled with mistakes. Mine absolutely is. Mistakes, lessons of having right relationship. I very much sometimes relate to the quote, "Youth is wasted on the young," because I'm just like, my God, if I'd known then what I knew now. But that's not the way it works. We have to learn. And one of our great teachers along the way is shame. And, you know, we've been taught to just like not feel shame and not want and to push it away or to not integrate it because we don't want to be ashamed or whatever. And I think it's really important that we actually give shame a seat at our table, to listen to what it has to say, because shame is going to be one of our greatest teachers moving forward into having right relationship with our sexuality, so that we can more deeply honor ourselves and this great force within us, so that we can more deeply honor those that we share this great force with, and their bodies and their hearts and their lives and their spirits and their essence and their sexuality. And so that we can, above and beyond all of that, more deeply honor this sacred earth and the sacred realm we find ourselves in, and all of the creatures that exist here as a result of this very same force. No more trying to dominate it, no more trying to suppress it, no more shaming it, no more destroying it, no more using this as a destructive force. We get to choose. It is in our power to start to heal our relationship to this force and to the shame that has been placed upon it. It starts with us. How can we now give shame a seat at our table? How can we start to listen to what it has to say? How can we allow it to be a teacher for us to move forward in greater harmony, in greater compassion, in deeper communion, and with love as the central force?